Welcome aboard PJNET's Live. Unborn Lives Matter. Hashtag rally. It is the bottom of the hour for those watching and hearing and seeing this live. And we have a second guest live with us tonight, and we're really looking forward to it. He is second not because he is in second place, but because he is on the West Coast, and it's a little bit more convenient as a matter of timing. J.D. Rucker. He has, it's J.D. Rucker on Twitter, at J.D. Rucker. He actually has one of those blue checkmark thingies next to his name. Hey, J.D., welcome to the Deep South. And come on in our studio, have a seat right here. J.D.,
Right.
a Christian, a pro-life Christian out in California. What's it like out there, man?
Well, what you just described is very rare. No, actually, I'm in Southern California, where here in Orange County, unlike LA, unlike definitely San Francisco, places like that, it's not so bad. There's a lot of pro-life Christians out here in Orange County. It's the last true bastion of conservatism, I think, in this ultra-liberal state.
Well, hopefully we can keep that beachhead and expand it a little bit. JD, a funny thing, I was kind of looking at your Twitter feed. You're very vocal on not just pro-life, not just unborn lives matter, but a number of topics of interest to conservative evangelicals. But I guess there came a point and that tweeting wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And you did what?
I did lots of things. I did give up. It's not just tweeting. I gave up on anything that was passive. We've sat around, I think, as conservatives for years, some of us for decades, waiting for real conservatism to reign in Washington. And I unabashedly, I was a Ted Cruz supporter. I do support Donald Trump as our president. I support the office, but I'm not going to sit there and just accept everything that he does, especially when he turns left, especially when he does anything insane. So we decided that we were going to do a few things. The first thing we did was built a site last year called the New Americana.
That's the newamericana.com.
Yes, sir. The newamericana.com. It is it's essentially it was a response to Drudge. It was a Drudge-like site, one that aggregates links to conservative stories, Christian stories, stories that patriots, I think, need to hear. And it updates throughout the day. It's manually updated. We don't use an algorithm. We're not using anything to propagate the links. We manually vet and select the links, pop them up there, and try to keep everybody informed. It's grown nicely. We're nowhere near the size of Drudge, but where they get 1.4 billion visitors, we're still shooting for the millions. So we're getting there.
Well, it's interesting because as a programmer, I know content aggregation. You could automate that through RSS feeds. I have experimented with that, and as you pointed out, you would be basically relying on the reputation of the source rather than the specifics of the article, because the computers don't read the articles, so you never know. Sort of like me bringing you on board live here tonight. So you never know what we're going to have.
Could have been a wacky California guy, and you never know.
And we would understand.
I could be doing this out of my garage.
You could.
Wait, I am.
Folks, when I first called JD earlier to do a camera check, I thought he was in a man cave, and that was a overhead projector, in his studio. There you go. And that is my kitchen. So, but in most of us conservatives, give a lot of allegiance, and one of the reasons I think that so many evangelicals are Republicans is there's so much in the Republican Party's platform that is pro-life.
Yes.
Yet now we have a Republican president, we have a Republican Senate, we have a Republican House. So when are we going to start being conservative?
And I don't think we are, and that's not to say that we won't be. That's not to generalize either. There are plenty of good evangelical conservatives in the House, in the Senate. There are people who truly fight for freedoms, who fight for life, and we want to support them. But we weren't going to rely on the GOP anymore. Reagan left office, we watched the GOP deteriorate into what we consider to be a big government party. Now, that's not to say that we're opposed to the GOP, but we did decide to have a backup plan, I guess you could say. We formed what's called the Federalist Party. It's now, people sometimes they hear the word Federalist and they assume that means that we're big government Federalists. No, our party is designed to be more along the lines of Reagan's idea of new federalism, of the concept that the federal government is too big. Federalism was never really about making a big federal government. Federalism has always been about making a balance between the states and the federal government. And so in the 18th century, the Federalist Party was going up against the Jeffersonians, the people that wanted, essentially, they didn't want a United States of America. They wanted a Confederate States. They wanted the states themselves, the individual states, to have complete power, complete sovereignty. If a country wanted to have a treaty, they'd have to have a treaty with Virginia and with Maryland and with every individual state. And there was essentially no power. They didn't want the government to have a navy. They wanted to have a very small army. They wanted to purely
militia.
Yeah, exactly.
Not you know what a militia is, JD? People assume that's it's obviously an armed force, but the difference between a militia and an army is militia bring their own weapons.
Yeah.
Thus, the Second Amendment.
And they can even be supplied their weapons. But yeah, so the militia, for example, in Switzerland, everyone is there. They live their lives as part of the militia. They have their own weapons within that they possess, they own. They keep them in their basement, and when there's a need, then they're called to arms. It's the same thing that the United States or the Confederate States wanted. So the Federalist Party opposed this. Not again. They wanted a very specific set of checks and balances. That's why they pushed for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to be able to differentiate, to separate the powers. But today, federalism represents, again, what Reagan wanted, what Richard Nixon wanted, which was to take the federal government and bring it down. We don't face a problem of the states having too much power like they did in the 18th century. It's the exact opposite today. The federal government itself holds way too much power. Okay, and it's time to bring that power back. Now, it's funny that we're talking about the pro-life movement because you'd mentioned, we've looked at the liberty movement. When we first got started with this entire concept last year, one of the first things we did was to see who could we help, who could we fix. We looked and we saw the Libertarian Party. And we thought, what? Just because they picked a poor candidate doesn't mean that the party is broken necessarily. Just because they had their best shot with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as the candidates, and they still weren't able to make a dent. We looked at them. I don't want to rip on libertarians. I want to make sure that we're clear here. But the Libertarian Party, in speaking with them, we discovered that there was some level of dysfunction. We spoke to other third parties, tried to work with them, see who we could take and build up, and there's just this backwards mentality. And so we returned back to the Libertarian Party, and that was kind of the kicker, was the pro-life aspect of it. The Federalist Party is a pro-life party. The Federalist Party has only 3 basic tenets, just as the Declaration of Independence defines certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The modern-day variation of that, or the Federalist Party concept of that, is still life, but rather than liberty, we're fighting for freedoms, and rather than pursuit of happiness, that's something that's very capable and easy to do today. But we look at it as the pursuit of smaller government, the right for the people to self-govern, for the states to be able to defend against an oppressive federal government, but also for the federal government to defend against an oppressive state government. We're seeing that happen too. I just posted an article today regarding pro-life on the Federalist Party that details a bill currently in the Senate. House. I get them all confused sometimes. But this Conscience Act is designed to prevent states such as California, where I am in New York, from being able to demand that healthcare professionals must perform essentially abortions on demand or lose their job. There is no conscience allowed. And that's something where this is an example of the state overstepping its bounds, and the federal government must be called in to tell them, no, you cannot take away an individual's First Amendment right to freedom of religion. You can't tell them to put their conscience aside, to put their religion aside, and perform something that is against their will, or else they will lose their job, their livelihood, and everything else. So we're looking for that balance as a party, and that's why we formed it, and we're growing nicely.
Well, it's quite a testimony to, I guess, your courage or stupidity. It depends, I guess, on how it turns out. You know,
Yeah.
would
It's going well.
would we have lost the revolution? Our founding fathers would have been hung for treason and considered, well, just stupid. And but JD, it's just great to have you join us here. It's great to have other voices, that are in concert, that believe. So many of the people that are frustrated. They've left the GOP. But what they've left for is, in many cases, where we fall apart is the social issues, such as abortion. So to be clear, your movement is pro-life. Does any state, in your framework and your platform, does any state have the right to allow an abortion?
So it's funny that you mentioned that. Or I should say, it's funny that you word it like that. Unlike most parties, our platform is going to be driven 100% by the states as long as they fall within those three criteria. Okay, there's only three non-negotiables: life, freedom, and that's individual personal freedoms,
right,
and the pursuit of small government. Outside of that, the states, the individual states, will have the power. Just as we want the government, the government to be run like that, we want our party to be run like that. We want to be a mirror image of what we envision for our government. We want our party to operate in the exact same way. And so, at the national level, life is a non-negotiable.
Okay, and for clarity, when does life begin, JD?
So for me, it begins we're here at in California. We're about to have our fourth child. We recently got some news about our child, and it's something that'll be coming out in a publication very soon. I'll hint to it later. We can maybe even talk about it later if we have some time. But for me, it begins at conception.
Okay, what about somebody else? What if they say it doesn't begin at conception, it begins at birth?
Then we have to have the debate. Here's the thing. We have to have a debate. And first and foremost, at this point, we're looking at a political question. This is a cultural issue, but we're looking at a political question. The political question of today is, when does it start? Does it start around the 6-week mark when the heart starts beating? Is it around the 20 to 24-week mark when the fetus is viable? When does life start? And that's not our call. Okay? I mean, let's face it. This is not our call until we can definitively say that this person, this human being, is actually considered a human being with rights at this point, or this point, or this point, or this point. We have to default back to the safest route, and the safest route would be at conception.
Okay, that's where I was headed, JD. Correct. Since your statement was, well, that's open to debate. Well, okay, because it's open to debate, that means there's a question. Since it's in question, doesn't it just make sense to err on the side of safety?
Yes. So again, but here's the thing. When I say it's open for debate, we have to understand that this issue is one, and this is important. I think I hope you know me well enough. You've read my tweets. I am unabashedly Christian faithful. I love Jesus Christ with all of my heart. My family does. This is something that we live for. This life is temporal in comparison to what lies ahead. With that said, the abortion argument must be fought outside of religion from a political perspective. Now, let's be clear. From a cultural perspective, the battle can include and should include a discussion of life as it pertains to God's creation. Okay? But with what counts from the debatable aspect is only the political. And like you said, if we're looking at this as there's this possibility, this possibility, this possibility, we do have to default back as far back as we need to go to make absolutely certain. So this is where people will say that it's the cultural side that has to push for the conception being the point of life. I disagree. I think that it is the political side. I wrote an article when the heartbeat bill was proposed in Ohio, they had two competing bills essentially, and predictably, John Kasich vetoed the heartbeat bill, which would have brought it back to essentially 6 weeks, and signed I think it was a 20-week bill, which is good. It's better than nothing. But again, that's where we start to get into the gray area. Is it really better than nothing? The answer to that question is yes. From a political perspective, 20 weeks.
Well,
is better.
strategically, yes. I mean,
right. Okay.
But in principle, we've had similar issues here in Florida, where our organization was being asked to support a bill that basically put hurdles in front of an abortion. You had to first get an ultrasound. You had to do this, and we elected not to support that bill. Okay. Now, the argument to support it would be it would save lives, and it would. Okay, sure. It would. It's a tough call. But at the end of the day, our call was, if we support that bill, what we're saying is it is okay to get an abortion if you complete steps 1, 2, and 3. And we could not, in principle, agree with that. And at the end of the day, each of us, in our own conscience, or at least myself and my peers concurred as we prayed, is, I will not be held in account for a decision that someone else makes.
Sure.
So we made the decision not to support it. And the same debate and argumentative dynamics come into play in these situations. Is it 6 weeks? Is it 20 weeks? Is it when they can feel pain? Is it when the heartbeat starts? That kind of thing. You're trying to define when personhood begins. And since we don't know what's at stake, well, a life. That's what's at stake. So I would say, unless you can definitively prove that it's not a person until it is at certain points of gestation, then I would argue, then let's give that lump of tissue the benefit of the doubt and not kill it. Right. And that's not a religious argument. That's not if there were no God, I would say the same thing.
Sure.
So.
Oh no, absolutely.
You're a smart guy.
And that's the thing. Ditto. That's the thing that we're faced with today is the moral dilemma. If you support a bill, I promoted that I really wanted Kasich to sign the heartbeat bill in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Was that saying that was I saying I approve of abortions at the 5 week mark? Mm-hmm. From one perspective, the answer is yes. From the other perspective, the answer is no. Here's the bottom line. This is not. If we look at this from a cultural, from a faithful perspective, then there's nothing to worry about. This is all in God's hands. Mm-hmm. Our job is to do good works, to fight for the faith, and so whatever our heart leads us to do, even though our hearts are evil, hopefully the Holy Spirit will guide us in the appropriate direction to pick. Like in your situation, to decide, what, this bill may save a life, may save 2 lives, but it could long-term set us back because we're accepting or acknowledging that abortion, given these criteria, is correct. Would the 20-week bill better than the 6-week bill? Mm-hmm. One would think logically that it is, but then again, we're accepting, we're acknowledging that, okay, fine, then we're saying that it's okay for a 5-week-old to be aborted. All of these are questions that will... These are questions that are going to be asked and debates that are going to be had until there is a definitive. And that definitive, the only possible definitive that I can see, is for abortion itself to become completely outlawed. But here's the thing, is that until we get there, we have to fight one of 2 ways. We either fight by taking steps, and that seems to be the common perspective, or we fight with an absolute imperative, which is what you described down there in Florida. You said, look, we don't need to take that step, because if we take that step, then we might be hurting ourselves long term, we might be hurting the cause long term, and we are going to be held to account for the decision to acknowledge that abortion is acceptable under these criteria.
Let me share this with you, JD. And there was a day. Now, I'm in Florida. And there is actually a Berkeley of the South. It is known as the People's Republic of Florida State University, where I majored in sociology and psychology, minoring in political science and religion. I was a flaming liberal Marxist. Okay? And I recall my pastor and I engaging in an argument that today actually makes sense to me, because he was, of course, advocating to abolish abortion, make it illegal. And this was right after Roe v. Wade. I mean, this was back in the day, you know. And as a liberal, I told my pastor, I said, you know, abortion may be legal, but it is not mandatory. Pastor, do your job and it won't matter. I really, you know, that, and I was just a hot-headed liberal at the time, but, you know, that was rather profound. If abortion were mandatory under the law, culturally and as Christians, we could prevent every abortion. Mm-hmm. Because people would disobey that law if their heart was right. So interesting. You know, gosh, we've run over our time. JD, you're a hero. Great to have you on board. Hope we can talk more again later. And we're excited about the work that you are doing, and keep doing it. And it's great to have your voice piling on for Unborn Lives Matter.
As they do.